All right. We're good.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the South Burlington Development Review Board meeting for Tuesday, April 4th. My name is Quinn Mann. I'm the vice chair filling in for Don Filbert, who is out this evening. And I will introduce the rest of our board members that we have here. We have Stephanie Wyman, Frank Koopman, and our newest member, John. I apologize, I don't know your last name yet. Moscatelli, okay, thank you so much. And then for our staff, we have our development review staff, Marla Keene and Marty Gillies. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So there are a few ways you can attend tonight's meeting. We have folks in person here tonight. You can also attend online. Whether you're joining in person or online, it's important that you sign in. This allows you to be granted party status, given that you want to appeal a decision that we make on any application that's discussed this evening. If you're in person, there's a sign-in sheet in the back of the room. If you're attending online and would like to sign in, please provide your name and email in the chat box. You can also sign in after the fact by emailing Marla Keene at mkeene, Keene, at sburl.com. And a couple more housekeepings for our virtual attendees. We ask that you keep your microphones and cameras off unless you are actively participating. And if you want to participate during the public comment periods, turn your camera on and raise your hand, and we'll recognize you. And with that, we'll move to our first agenda item, emergency evacuation procedures. For those that are in the building with us, there's 2 doors in the back. You can go right or left and head out the exits. And are there any additions, deletions, or changes in order of the agenda items tonight?
I suppose so. We'll get to it really quickly, but it looks like we are not going to be able to have a quorum for agenda item number 5. So if you are here for agenda item number 5, that will be postponed. We'll discuss the date that's postponed to in just a couple minutes, though. So if you want to hear about that, just stick around for another 5 minutes and you should be good to go. Otherwise, agenda stands as written.
Okay, and any announcements beyond our new board member? Hearing none. And comments and questions from the public not related to the agenda? I don't think we have any. So we will move on to agenda item number 5. I will read this. Site plan application SP 22056 of Beta Technologies, Inc. to amend a previously approved plan for a 344,000 square foot manufacturing and office building. The amendment consists of adding 261 parking spaces at 154 DaVinci Drive. This item was scheduled to be heard at our last board meeting on March 21st and was postponed due to lack of a quorum. As Marla has mentioned, unfortunately, we will need to postpone again for the same reason.
So sorry about the postponement. I appreciate everyone's patience with this. We are a committee of volunteers, and sometimes life happens. We had a couple scheduled absences and then one unexpected absence tonight. Board member Stephanie Wyman is recused from this application, which brings us down to 3. And our attorney tells us that though a recused member does not count towards the total board, we still need a majority of members. So a majority of 6 is still 4. As you can see, we only have 3 in the room, and so we won't be able to make any decisions on this item. I'm going to suggest postponing this to April 18th, which is our next regularly scheduled meeting. I would love to try and schedule it sooner, but unfortunately I can't ask people who aren't here about their availability sooner. And we have to make a decision in public during this meeting on when to reschedule it to. We have plenty of room on the 18th, should have no problem discussing it fully. And yeah, I really appreciate everyone's patience with this. Could you please use a microphone?
Thank you. Art Klugo, Beta Technologies, thanks for giving me a few minutes. I'm sure you want to move on, and this is likely not where anybody wanted to be tonight for sure. We had hoped to get through this and done considerable amount of work to get to this point. It's not clear from the rules of procedure that you actually do need to make that decision tonight. You can wait and call a special meeting, and we are going to request a special meeting. As you mentioned, this is the second continuation. We are extremely concerned about the impact of the project and our ability to deliver on our commitments to our vendors, our customers, our investors. We're putting over $200 million in the ground on this project to create a tremendous number of jobs. To have the project delayed any further is really putting this at risk. So I would ask respectfully that the board and the acting chair consider how we progress into a special meeting sooner than April 18th. Thank you.
I'm not going to be able to speak to special meetings and how they work on the fly, but I can absolutely look into that first thing in the morning with our legal team. I know that council can call a special meeting. It only requires 72 hours notice. I'm not sure about a warned public hearing. So if the board would like me to, I'm happy to look into that first thing in the morning and try to organize another date.
Just real quick from your rules of procedure, if you look at section 5, item A, special meetings may be called by the chair. I would presume, and Frank could maybe verify this, the acting chair in this case, provided at least 24 hours notice is given to each board member and the time and place of each special meeting is publicly announced at least 24 hours before the meeting. Those are much different guidelines than the guidelines that we're talking about. So as you look at that, Marla, if you could, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, I wonder how that dovetails with the statutory requirements. So that's what I'll be looking into in the morning.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So yes, I think as a board, we'd be open to that. Marla, if you can look into that and can figure out our availability to get a quorum before the 18th. But for the time being, would we still continue it until the 18th right now?
Yeah.
Or, okay.
And
So
and I'll talk to you guys before you walk out the door, not to do in public session because that's a waste of everybody's time, but have a conversation with the folks that are here about their availability before we leave tonight.
Yeah, and I think that's our understanding as well, especially from talking to staff earlier today, that it's an either or. We need to request a special meeting / hearing. Understand that the next scheduled meeting is on the 18th. So.
Okay.
great, so we will look into that option, but right now I will entertain a motion to continue this to.
We actually can't make a motion without.
Oh, right, because we don't have
quorum.
enough
So
folks.
I
Never
am
mind.
postponing the meeting until the
Perfect.
18th unless we are able to schedule a special meeting on legally and with works with everyone's schedule.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Art. Okay, and that brings us to agenda item number 6, continued preliminary and final plat application SD 2305 of Gary Bourne to create a general planned unit development by re-subdividing 3 existing lots into 3 new lots of 0.1 acres Lot 1, 0.14 acres Lot 2, and 1.06 acres Lot 3, and constructing a 3,350 square foot financial institute on Lot 1, a 6,480 square foot 2-story mixed commercial and residential building on Lot 2, and a 3-story 27-unit multifamily building on Lot 3 at 760 Shelburne Road. This is another application that was continued from March 21st due to our lack of a quorum, so we thank you for your patience and glad that we can hear you tonight. So with that, this is a continuation, so you all if you've spoken before, you've been sworn in. Is there anyone new on your team that may need to be sworn in?
It's been a while, maybe.
Okay, we'll do it for good measure. So raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury? I do. Excellent, thank you. And I think to start too, just if everyone could speak their name into the microphone so we have that on record as well.
Okay, good evening. It's Gary Bourne, the owner of the project.
Thank you.
And Jennifer Desatel, Trudell Consulting Engineers. the engineer and project manager.
I'm Greg Rabideau from Rabideau Architects, the project architect.
Excellent, thank you. And just for awareness, there is another one at the podium over there, so if you get up at another time and it's easier to chat there. So, yep. Oh,
There's some
someone
folks online.
Yep.
Lucy there, TCE.
Kelly Mejia from TPG Architecture.
Excellent, and we saw you both last time as well, so thanks. So before we begin, we've seen this application before on March 7th. And I just want to note that I'm sure you all noticed as well in the staff report, they maintained all of the comments that were in that original staff report. And some of them now are noted that staff considers the criteria met, and we don't need to discuss anymore. So those I'll be going through really quickly, but if there's anything that you guys want to add, feel free to say so on those items. And other than that, do you just want to give maybe an overview of what you've been working on since we last talked? We do have a new board member, so if you just want to give a brief couple-minute overview, and then we can jump into the items.
Sure, I can do that. So in the past few weeks, we have been working on responses to some of the initial staff comments that we received, and we have provided responses and submitted that to staff, which I think is reflected in the updated notes for tonight. We did decide to not resubmit a site plan package. Obviously, there's some things that are somewhat straightforward to revise, but we decided to not, in the middle of these multiple hearings, be submitting multiple rounds of revisions here and there. So we hope that after tonight, we'll have enough direction to make the changes we need to make for the next time we come in front of this board. So I just want you all to know that we are happy to revise those plans. We're just trying to do it in an efficient manner.
Yep, that makes sense, thank you. Okay, so we will move on to comment number 1. So previously, we had directed the applicant to amend the plans to provide the appearance of 2 stories of the building on Lot 1, which is the financial institution. And we had indicated that no further discussion is required at this time. So that's one that we'll move forward on. The next staff comment we have is, regarding the reduced setback that has been granted. And so the update is the board felt that the reduced front setback would result in a project which better meets the standards. And so this one has also been met, so we'll move on. Sorry. And with that, we are moving on to comment number 3. This comment has to do with having one entry facing the primary road. And another component of the regulation that we're looking at is that the access should have a direct separate walkway to the primary road that's at least 8 feet wide. And so staff has noted that this criterion has not been met for Lot 3 and that the plans be modified.
Yes, so we did provide a response that we can modify the sidewalk to be 8 feet, unless you'd like to.
Well,
add
I'd
something.
like the board to understand that the city of South Burlington has determined that 5 feet on Swift Street is the correct size, and the state of Vermont has determined that on Shelburne Road, that 5 feet is the standard, and that's what's in place today and will be for the foreseeable future. No indication from Vermont Trans that they're going to change anything. As the owner, it's been drawn, and it leaves us more room for landscaping and to just simply have this is from the end of the building that faces Swift Street, the rear apartment building, straight out to Swift Street. We're just advocating that it's 5 foot at the street. It seems 5 foot from the building. It's a small ask, but it does match what's in the area, and I don't think it causes a problem. But we leave it to the board. If they really have to have 8, then we'll dig up the extra and just pour the concrete. But remember, where it hits, it immediately goes to 5 feet.
So again, we're looking, the regulation calls out this 8-foot width. Does any board members want to offer comment on that? Or do we just want to move forward with that the applicant has complied with that, or do we want to consider the 5-foot?
Whether we have the authority to waive the 8 feet?
It's a dimensional standard, so I suppose, but waivers are required to better meet the standards of the PUD. So the applicant has to demonstrate that a 5-foot sidewalk is better in some way than an 8-foot sidewalk.
Well, what you said is it's consonant or consistent with, if I understand. I'm sorry. By the way, are your mics on? I'm a little,
They are.
I'd appreciate whatever you can do to lean as close as you can. It's not your fault, it's my fault.
No problem.
I understood you to say that you contend that a 5-foot sidewalk is an improvement because it is more harmonious with the other properties in the area. Is that your position?
Yeah, it's more harmonious with the city's sidewalks, which is what it's connected to.
And I guess I would add to that, I mean, it is additional impervious. I'm not sure that an 8-foot sidewalk is necessary for pedestrians.
Wait a minute, when you say the city sidewalk, you mean on Shelburne Road, or you mean on,
Both are 5 foot.
on Swift Street too?
Swift Street's 5 foot, what connects to this, and Shelburne Road is 5 foot as well.
So you would have an 8-foot wide sidewalk, and the next property would have a 5-foot sidewalk on Swift Street?
Correct. It would connect to a 5 foot.
So this is talked about for Swift Street specifically later in the staff report, but Swift Street has a rec path right now in front of your property. It's a sidewalk. But the city's capital projects comments are to change it to a rec path to be compatible with the rec path on the rest of Swift Street. And I believe that's an 8-foot width. So it would be an 8-foot connecting to an 8-foot through on Swift, though you are correct that Shelburne Road is 5 feet.
And the 8-foot rec path you're referring to is coming east-west
Yes.
down to the corner of Shelburne Road.
Yes.
Not entering my property. Is that correct?
Can you
that's
pan
correct.
down a little bit? Yeah, so if you see on the right-hand side of the page, that is a rec path. And so the project, in the staff report, the request of the city is that rec path on the right-hand side of the page extend across the front of this property instead of a concrete sidewalk. It would be an asphalt rec path across the Swift Street part of the property.
Correct.
Well, then it would all be 8 feet, is that your point?
Right.
Well, no, it's a rec path because of the bike and walkers that are encouraged to use that down to the corner,
Right.
not to cross into my property. My property is for pedestrians leaving the apartment house straight out.
I would also note that I don't think that any other property that's been developed in the urban design overlay, of which there are a handful, not a dozen, but 5 at least, have fully complied with the 8-foot connection. So it's up to the board. I don't have strong feelings about it, but just giving the context.
Just to be clear, Frank, we're talking about this little.
No, we're
No,
talking
up
about
on
the
Swift
one
Street, go around the corner. Yeah, keep going
Where?
farther right,
further.
that
Yeah.
one on
So
the
it's-
side of the driveway.
This?
Keep going,
Oh,
past
okay.
the car.
Oh, I can't. My screen's got.
See, I can't tell what we're looking at. Where's Swift
So-
Street and where's
Oh, right there.
Shelburne Road?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you've
where
got
his
your,
hand
you've
is
got your thing
now.
on it there.
So it's from the sidewalk to the building.
Is this?
Right.
Correct. It's for the pedestrians leaving the apartment house, if they were going to go to Denny's, for instance.
The other thing maybe to consider is that it is additional impervious area, and I'm not sure that it's necessary from a pedestrian accessibility standpoint to have it be 8 feet. That is a little bit wide. It also provides, reducing it to the width that we have it now, also provides a little more green space, open space for plantings, so.
How long is that stretch of sidewalk?
Anybody got a scale ruler? Probably 25 feet. Best guess?
For myself, I would grant the waiver.
I have no problem with that.
Yeah, looking at it, it seems like it would, with the rec path and then onto the property, so I would be comfortable with the waiver too. Okay, so I think we have direction on that.
Wait a minute, where does that leave us and them? I mean, did three out of four of us just say, do you have a feeling about it, Stephanie?
I'm okay with it, Frank.
Okay.
All right. So we'll move on to comment 4. This one is regarding glazing. So for all properties in the urban overlay district, a minimum of 75% of glazing shall be transparent. So we were looking for a demonstration of how this criteria will be met and clarification on how much glazing will be transparent for the building on Lot 1.
Kind of at the end.
That's the bank.
Yeah, but when is the correct time?
I'm sorry.
When would the bank typically be able to demonstrate at final inspection?
I'm going to approach the mic here.
And there's a button, that says push, make sure it's bright green.
Can you hear me now?
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, great. This is a sensitive issue because the bank is providing their own architecture, and they've been very careful in their language to us today. I mean, the intention is that prior to issuing a zoning permit, we would come back and show how we meet the other criteria, and I would say fold that into this. On our drawings, there's a little table on the elevation sheets that says what the percentage of glazing is. It looks like they're compliant, but we don't know how much advertising graphics or whatever they're gonna put on there. Long way of saying, I believe their intention is to comply. They gave us a caveat, so long as they can afford to do it or whatever, but I'm not worried about Chase running out of money. So I think if we can tie that into that other condition or treat it similarly, that would be effective.
Okay, so I think we would need clear demonstration of this before, like, closing a hearing, right? But on this, or?
So what we have done on other projects is when the applicant says 100%, obviously there's no demonstration. When it's getting close to 75%, we have required demonstration before the hearing is closed. If it's like, oh yeah, we, might have some graphics on the windows, but the windows are going to be transparent, but for the graphics, I think that's something we can do as a zoning permit, because you can't have that much graphics on the windows anyway. But if they're planning on making some of the glazing spandrel or translucent with a screen on it or something, we would want to see that before closing the hearing.
Okay. We'll have to advise on them to provide that.
Yeah, if I may, I just wanted to clarify that we saw this comment and we plan on addressing it as we work through the partial raising of the height of the building. So we'll definitely include a table that shows the percentage of the glazing.
Thanks, Kelly.
Great, so we'll move on. On to comment number 5. This is also about glazing, and we are all set on this one unless there are further comments. Same with number 6, it looks like we are all set. Number 7, we also no further discussion. Which brings us to comment 8. This is regarding rooftop elements. So we are looking for confirmation or demonstration of how the rooftop mechanical equipment will or will not be visible from the ground level.
I'm not sure, but wouldn't this normally be, maybe Marla can help me with this. Marla, is this something that would normally be inspected prior to an occupancy permit? Because at that point, all the equipment would be in place.
It depends on the scale of the equipment. Marty, can you pull up that supplemental rooftop equipment plan that they had provided? I assume it's in the packet.
We've had some good luck with the mixed-use building that's up near the front with shrinking the amount of equipment that's actually on the roof, and it's in the center section of the roof, and there is a bit of a parapet wall. So we believe we're all set, but we'll see what the drawing shows. Yep, that's the right building, yep.
So, do you have any sense, so what's the sense of scale on these things? Are we talking like a foot or two? Are we talking like 8 feet?
We don't
And
have
if you
to-
could just introduce yourself, because you didn't get introduced earlier.
Right, Bush. Okay. Alan Spencer, I'm with Rabideau Architects.
Were you sworn in last time?
Spencer?
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Were you sworn in previously? Did you?
I came in while the swearing was in, so I didn't. so
Can we
I'm
do it quickly? Yep. Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury? Excellent, thank you.
So the plan you have in front of you was put together prior to some further conversations we have with the mechanical engineer. Those two big rooftop units are gone. We're doing a much smaller residential size system for the commercial space on the ground floor. So we haven't got complete plans from that yet, so we don't know exactly how far they're gonna stick up, but the hope is that our parapet is gonna be high enough to hide most of that, especially from eye level. Going to the large building, that's an unknown right now. I mean, we have no mechanical plans or designs even started on that building, so. Our hope is that we're just gonna say that we're gonna screen them with the appropriate materials that are gonna, reflect the building around them, so.
So I guess the risk of not providing that is that if you can't get them hidden, then it would have to be an amendment to the plan. So if you can't if you can't get them fully screened, I guess,
To make that a post facto, I mean, shouldn't they be required to demonstrate compliance with that criterion before we rule? To make it just prior to a zoning permit,
right, then
it's
it
a
leaves some
pretty major
subjectivity,
element, isn't
right,
it?
yeah.
The only issue with that is you're asking us to design a whole mechanical system for a building that hasn't even started construction drawings yet. So that's a far reach and something that happens way down the road, to know what mechanical equipment is gonna be on the roof of that building.
I don't think your mic is on.
Oh, sorry. I was pushing, I swear.
except you would have the same objection if we said, we'll make it a condition of the construction permit, right? You would have the same problem.
When we actually. There we go. When we go in for a construction permit from fire safety, we do have to include mechanical drawings at that level. But that's something that's just not prepared at this stage of the game.
So typically applicants have like a sense, it's gonna be individual unit size units for each apartment, and those are typically 1 to 2 feet tall, and this is what we're gonna do. Or we're gonna have, 2 5-foot units, and this is what we're gonna do. And maybe they're gonna be 6 feet, or maybe they're gonna be 1.5 feet if they're the smaller ones, but, it's within sort of the scale. Can you get to that level?
Well, what's proposed right now, I believe, in talking with Gary, is we're looking at split systems for the residential portion of the large building. The commercial area, in terms of the energy recovery, is still a little bit up in the air. Those units can get a little larger. But the elevator itself is already hidden within the building structure, so that doesn't protrude up and get seen. I don't think we're gonna have any issue hiding what we have up there. But it's such an unknown at this level.
Well, I mean, can't we
We'll be seeing you
simply
guys.
make it a condition of the permit that no rooftop structure will be visible above the parapet?
Without screening.
Well, those are two different things. And the microphone isn't a push and hold, it's just push it and let go.
I
Okay.
did realize that.
Okay. Those are two different things. So if the board wants to have them screened by being faced in siding material, that's one condition. If the board wants them to be screened by not being visible, that's a different condition altogether. We are going to see you guys again. As Jen has mentioned, there is a revision to the site plan forthcoming. Is that something you can get a kind of sense for, again, without all the final details, by
What
a
if,
continued hearing?
What if, without sizing the equipment, we just provide a sketch showing what the screening would look like if it was needed?
If it was what,
If it was needed. If we needed to screen some of the rooftop equipment, we would show you a proposal of what that would look like and what materials we'd be using.
you would show us something that we could then translate into language to specify any condition?
Sure.
Is that a condition that
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
I would be comfortable with that?
Okay.
Okay,
Great.
great, thank you.
Oh, and back to the other plan, I think this goes with, I'm not sure if it's on this write-up or not, about the solar-ready zone. That same plan for the smaller building shows the shaded area to the right. There is no mechanical equipment proposed on that roof, and that encompasses more than 40% of that roof, which we have dedicated for the solar-ready zone. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Al.
you. Okay, so this brings us to comment 9. This is for landscaping.
Excuse me for just a second. Actually, you can just educate me a little bit. Is it correct, because I actually never thought of that before, that a solar installation is incompatible with rooftop mechanicals?
It's just you lose area. You can't install the solar where the mechanical equipment is. You need to maintain at least, I believe, 3 feet of clearance around the rooftop equipment for access.
So it would make it very difficult at best, right?
You'd be limited in size, for sure.
Okay. Comment 9, for landscaping. So for lots with buildings which are set back 50 or more feet from the front line, at least 50% of the required landscaping shall be installed between the front building and the front lot line. So this criterion applies to the building on Lot 3, which, remind me, is the
Apartment building.
apartment building. And so we also want to consider what this criterion means for within a PUD. Marla, could you help me on that point again, as far as what kind of we want to be thinking about in terms of the PUD versus how we would look at it normally, or just for a single lot, rather?
Can you pull up the landscaping plan, Marty? Thanks. So the criteria is for lots, not projects, for lots with buildings that are set back 50 or more feet from the front lot line, which for Lot 3, the one on the right, is Swift Street. At least 50% of the required landscaping shall be installed between the front building line and the front lot line. This project is not really contemplated in the way that criteria is met or is written, because this project has a minimum landscaping, but I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jen or Lucy, you're not really proposing the landscaping to be met on a lot-by-lot basis. You're proposing the minimum landscaping to be met for the PUD as a whole. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, Lucy.
So the question here is, building 3, the building on Lot 3 has a required minimum landscaping. There's a number that is 50% of the value of that required minimum landscaping. But they're kind of considering this as a whole. So what does it mean to say 50% of the landscaping needs to be installed to the front of the building on Lot 3? I mean, you could be strict about it and say 50% of the required value for the building on Lot 3 has to be installed between the building on Lot 3 and Swift Street. But I would say that there's potentially some room for flexibility, given that it's a PUD.
What?
I would just say, we would appreciate that flexibility consideration, because I think Lucy's online now to chime in, but she did spend a lot of time trying to come up with a cohesive landscape and both planting and hardscape design with some cool benches and other features that are consistent without the site, so it didn't feel disjointed, that there's just a residential building that's totally separate from the other buildings. So I think that's reflected in this design, so we would appreciate that consideration.
A couple of other things we might consider, and again, it's flexibility. Right now, the current landscape design that Lucy's come up with, Lucy Thayer, allows for maximum view of the landscaping on this site. Now, the planning board directed us to go to the PUD route to get this project put together the way it is. With that in mind, when you're on Shelburne Road, which is one of the busiest roads in the state, whether you're going north or south, the landscape at this site, if you look at the color photos, or if you've been down by, you'll know what I mean. It becomes quite visible if you're on the two busiest roads. Furthermore, if you're driving east on Swift, that is going up Swift Street, so you're going to go up to a Spear. Again, the landscaping is in your face. It's a lot of landscaping. It's a big investment, but I think we've maximized, or Lucy's maximized, the view of that using the PUD requirement. We're required to have X amount of landscaping for the entire project. What's the best places to make the maximum use? The other thing to understand is we moved that curb cut on Swift Street up the road, and we eliminated the other curb cut. And under the PUD, we could do that. We eliminated the second one on Swift and the second one on the busiest road in the state, Shelburne Road. But to do that, we needed to push the curb cut up to make the traffic flow through here much better than it ever was before. So irregardless of the fact that we've brought the traffic numbers way down on the site, we've also reorientated it to maximize how can they flow in and out through here. But when you do that, something has to give. So if you look at your photos, what gave was the land in front of that end of the building. But I think if you ask most people driving by, they would assume that as they face the building the long way on Shelburne Road, they're actually looking at the front of the building. I know technically, if you chop the thing up into lots, like it was originally, then Swift Street was the front in the old days, or as of today. But I think the public would view it the other way. So that's where we were coming from when we orientated the landscaping. Thank you.
Also keep in mind that the ATM's got to go, so there will be more room for landscaping when that ATM is gone.
That needs to be discussed.
What's going to fill the space in front of the large building?
I'm sorry, beg that?
Now or in the future?
Well, as planned.
As planned, what's going to fill the space in front of the building on the Swift Street side or the Shelburne Road facing side?
The Shelburne Road side. Where are we talking about the landscaping problem? On the Swift Street side?
Swift Street side, yes.
Yeah. No, it doesn't make any,
Marty's going to draw the lot lines, or highlight the lot lines.
where the heck is the lot line for that? Is it following the curve of the driveway there? No.
Well, that's the, yeah. Is that right? So the lot line for lot 1 is the north-south element there?
Yes, that's a little tricky. The regulations, even though we're developing the site as a PUD, require the buildings to be on separate lots because they're different uses. So the lots are drawn in here, but really the project is being developed as one cohesive project.
And you can see that, 50% of the landscaping is clearly not between the building on Lot 3 and Swift Street, because it's mostly pavement, and most of the landscaping is sort of to the Shelburne Road side of it. So this is clearly not met, but, what does it mean to meet this in the case of a PUD?
Just clarifying question on that. It's, I understand that it's 3 lots because there are 3 buildings, but as part of a PUD, are these lots then legally bound together?
Yes,
So there's a covenant that they can't be split?
right.
Okay, just wanted to make sure of that.
Well, what room do you think, look, this is not the first time we're running into a situation in which the strict reading of the regulation may produce a less than desirable design. Is the problem that I'm trying to figure out exactly what the problem is. What do you, if you put a lot of landscaping at that end of the building, what you're talking about is the north end of the large building, is that it? Is that what we're looking at?
Yeah, I think we would be looking at a significant redesign if we really did have to fit 50% of the landscaping in that, on that side of the building. So I think that's the question is, can we get some relief from that strict requirement because it's a PUD and we're developing it as one cohesive project?
What is that space between the gray, if you could keep the hand just down into that space that almost looks like a devil's knife, you know, the light gray, that light gray space, what is that? And why is it, what distinguishes it from the darker gray to the north of it?
The darker gray is the driving lane, the access way to the entire site. And that lighter line where the car is parked is an area where we've designed to be a drop-off and pickup area, and even UPS drop-off or Uber Eats. There's no other parking on that side of the building, and we thought it was important to provide some type of realistic accessibility to that building if you needed to drop off.
So if you filled it up with landscaping, in other words, if somebody drove in with a UPS truck, there'd be no place to put the truck?
Right, so it's a tight site, but we spent a lot of time on this design because we think it's the best fit for this site. So that was one of the considerations that we made.
Well, another way to meet the minimum land, well,
I think we would be hard pressed to get 50%
Yeah.
in there. We might be looking at shifting that access road closer to Shelburne Road, which I would hate to do from a traffic safety standpoint, so.
you know, I mean, the design looks to me, at least as far as I can tell, like it makes sense. The problem I have for me is that a lot line is a lot line. I really don't think there's a intellectually honest distinction between a lot line within a PUD and a lot line that's not within a PUD. It's intellectual hash, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm asking, what's the flex on the landscaping? If there is any.
Well, it's, the same criteria. If it better meets the objectives,
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
if it better meets the objectives of the urban design overlay and of the PUD, then the board can waive it. But like I said before, the board has unequivocally stated that the ATM is not allowable as designed. So removing that ATM lane creates a hell of a lot more space, for landscaping. And so maybe the direction is, you're going to have to provide revised plans without the ATM, landscape that space, and provide a calculation as to where you are. And maybe the board would be willing to issue a waiver for the remaining dollar value at that time.
I think I respect your opinion on that, but I do think the ATM issue is a separate issue. So I wonder if we should put this discussion about the landscaping on hold temporarily so we get a chance to talk about the ATM. I guess as far as the ATM is concerned, what I heard from the board last time was that we would have the opportunity to discuss how it meets the criteria outlined in the PUD to make it a more compact, accessible,
efficient
workable. There's
site.
a bunch of language in there. And we started to answer that question, and one of the board members suggested that we think about our answer and come back. So I thought that's where we left off last time.
Yeah, we can move forward and to have that
minute.
discussion. Yep, and then revisit this. But I want to confirm overarchingly, it sounds like that 50% does fall into the dimensional kind of standard that we could give a waiver to on landscaping. Okay. Great, thank you. And that, we will move on to comment 10. And this is about inclusionary, the required number of inclusionary zoning units. It seems like there is some, determination of how many units, inclusionary zoning units were required. And it is, the number that's been landed on is 30 units. 10 units of the 30 units are required for inclusionary zoning. And so we were looking for your response on that.
Thank you. The short response is we disagree with your math a little bit. I will say, I remember, Frank, you've been an advocate for this proviso in the zoning ordinance for a long time. I'm glad to see it there, but it's a little difficult to read. Our understanding is that the base density for the site is per the tabulations in the zoning ordinance, 20 units, of which 3 have to be inclusionary, right? That's right. So we have 20 units, 3 of which are inclusionary. Those come with not a bonus, but an offset.
Offset, yep, yep.
So the ones that are required by law come with an offset. At any rate, that takes that offset, takes you up to 23, which leaves us a shortfall of 7. For us, the math would be half of those, 3.5 would be inclusionary. Because of the rounding provisions of the code, you would round up to 7 total. 3 per the original offset, plus 4 more where we're asking for an inclusionary bonus. So the total number would not be 10 out of 30, but from our perspective, the maximum would be 7 out of 30. 10 out of 30 would take you up to 33%, which is twice the sort of target goal of the ordinance. It says normally you want us to have 15%. We can go up to 50%. But 10 units out of 30 is too big a bite for the finances of the project to work. And I'm not sure that's really how the ordinance is meant to read. So we have our original 20 units, which includes 3 inclusionary zoning units. We get 3 bonus units, that takes us up to 23. If we add another 3.5, or in this case 4 inclusionary units, that gets us up to 30. Unfortunately, you can't exceed 50% of the lot value. I know you mentioned in your notes that you could get up to 31, but we don't see that being permissible. You could also read the regs. I read the regs to read that if we needed 10 inclusionary units to get from 20 to 30, that we would have 5 inclusionary units and 5 bonus units. That would mean we would only need 5 additional inclusionary zoning units. But either way, I think the important thing for us is it's not 10. I think we're most likely going to land on 7, and I would even advocate for 5. And I'm here to talk the math if you want to do it.
Yeah, I think the kind of the backstory of this is that I wasn't really involved in this project initially, and then when Marla was out on vacation last week, I stepped in to kind of update the staff comments, and I noticed, so you guys were asking all the references to 6 inclusionary units to be eliminated, and for those references to be changed to 5, because we had in our staff comments initially been kind of alluding to 6 inclusionary units, and you guys were like, no, we're only going to do 5. So as I was revising that section, I kind of fell down this rabbit hole of the math.
Yeah.
And you're right that it's not very clear. So I think our game plan, given that Marla hadn't really seen this, like she came back in the office today, and it was like, surprise, I changed your staff comment in a pretty big way. So I think given that Marla hasn't had a time to look at this, and also the board hasn't like had a super detailed look on this language, we were thinking maybe this would be best discussed in the deliberative session when we can kind of break out the language and everyone can bring out their calculator and their pencil, and we can sort of figure out what this ordinance says and how it's applied to your project.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I don't envy you the ice cream headache you will get running through the numbers. But it does seem as though if you have an applicant voluntarily coming forward to provide the added units, in our mind, the math, if it's done the way we think it should be, makes that possible. But if we look at it your way, then we'd have 10 inclusionary units, which is substantially greater than.
Right, double what you're looking at doing, yeah.
And the regs clearly say that the inclusionary units, the bonus units do not have to meet the income requirements. So only half, the bonus units aren't encumbered by the inclusionary zoning rules, the way the ordinance is written. So anyhow, if you were asking me, I would say they need to provide 5 inclusionary units but if we torture the math in your favor, I think we would say 7 would be the maximum.
Sure. And I think
We'll let
we
you
felt
fix
in
that.
the interest of time, it'd be best to parse through that in a separate session and just keep moving tonight. But definitely noting that you guys are looking for 5 and that my read read 10. And so, we got to sort that out.
Okay.
I'd just like to point out that the 5, we did have 6 originally, the 5 came from a conversation I had with Marla and an email that saying she we were required 5 to get to.
Right.
So that's where the 5 came from.
That's back in January.
On a secondary note, I encourage you all to do the calculations that are shown in the LDRs because the math does not make sense whatsoever. I see how you applied it to get to the 10 units, but do the numbers, it doesn't add up. None of the examples work out right now. They've doubled the number of inclusionaries. If you half the inclusionaries, then the math works. So you said 10 out of 5 actually.
Well, does it say you have to match each additional unit with an inclusionary unit? Is if that's what it says, that's what it says.
Well, the language gives you bonuses in 2 ways. It gives you the offset for the required units at a 1-to-1 ratio, and it gives you the same 1-to-1 ratio for bonus units. So in that regard, the math is pretty
All right,
straightforward.
well, I'll look at the language. I don't have the language in front of me yet.
It's just that the examples are confusing because if you tabulate the numbers that they use in the example, you actually end up with more units than what they're looking for.
Well, you'd end up with 34, sounds like, in this case.
We don't have any place to put 34.
Look at the formula and see, maybe I'm completely wrong. That is certainly possible, but I've run the numbers a bunch of times now and I just can't make the math work.
Well, if it's 3 for the base, that's mandatory, and you got to match another 7 for each 7 additional market rate units, then you're at 34 units, right?
We're not trying to get match 7 units. We're trying to get 7 units total. So that means we need 4.
You need, okay, you need 4 and 3, okay. So that
All right.
sounds like 7.
I think we need to look at the language. It's, I see where you're coming from, and I want to look at it again and I'm glad you provided your testimony because that was exactly our intent tonight, is to hear your testimony, take that reading into consideration when we look at this again. I'll make sure I point out the specific section to the board in advance of the deliberative session, and everybody can come prepared with their calculators and pencils and big erasers.
Excellent. We will sort that out in deliberative session. Thank you. So moving on to comment 11, this is also regarding inclusionary units, household income eligibility. So we would be requesting written testimony on the current required cost of inclusionary units and income limits. It seems like that would probably come, you can provide that written.
Yes, that's provided, apparently in Chittenden County, it's provided by a county agency,
Okay.
and it's published every year, so I'm not sure, we can dig up whatever the 2023 is, if it's been issued yet, or give you last year's, but it's public information. And every year it's issued.
Right, so we'd want you to show us how you're proposing to meet that.
Oh, I misread, I'm
Yeah,
not
I
reading
would-
it the way
I
you
would
are.
just-
Not like your rent, but like, are you gonna do 2-bedroom units or 4-bedroom? You just run the math a little bit farther than the straight VHFA spreadsheet, but
Okay.
not too much farther.
Okay. Yeah, we can provide this to you. We did the math. Right now in South Burlington, an apartment affordable to a family of 3 at 80% of median income, they can spend 30% of their household income on rent. That works out to about $1,935 a month for a two-bedroom apartment. And we designed the project so that the two-bedroom units that are meant to be inclusionary are 100 square feet smaller, and they have one fewer bathroom than the two-bedroom, two-bath units that are market rate. Otherwise, they're exact same envelope, exact same appearance. So, but we can run the math for you and give you those numbers.
Excellent, thank you.
And is there any distinction these days between, I see there's a reference to VHFA. Is there any distinction between what VHFA uses for income limits and what HUD is using?
I can't answer that. I'd have to look and see. I just pulled these up today. These are for January 23. I can pull up HUD's
Published by whom, HUD or VHFA?
This is VHFA, but I think they get their numbers from the same source.
Well, HUD is the mothership, so to speak.
Right.
Everybody spins off of that.
Right.
I don't know of anybody, and, I mean, we might, well, that's a separate question. Sorry.
Yeah, and as you consider this is proposed to be a rental project. Gary's going to buy and hold this. He's not planning on spinning this off as condos unless some disaster happens, and we'll deal with that then. But we would be basing this on the rental side of the equation. So that makes it a little simpler.
So 30% of 80% of medium these days is almost $2,000 a month?
Hard to believe, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, my first apartment in Chittenden County was like $350 a month, but time has gone by for us, Frank.
I think so.
Any other questions about this?
No, we'll just need that, a written testimony to accompany that, yeah. But thank you for
I
that.
think the next couple are about
Yeah.
affordable housing, so you might want to stay there.
Oh, okay, yeah, if you, so, I think we're on, number 12 now, so we're looking for the long-term management of the inclusionary units. So we would be looking, for that information,
Sounds like
prior to closing would be part of
you're
that.
going to manage them yourself, so you're not going to have a third party manage the affordability.
Initially, we would manage them, but we would likely engage a firm, and then whatever is standard done in the city, I mean, as far as we can include the language on affordability in the lease, if that's standard.
Well, wait a minute, there's a very easy way to do this, which is a housing subsidy covenant. Are you familiar with the device? You can, like any other land covenant, although in Vermont, you can create a housing subsidy covenant, it gets recorded in the land records, and states what the criteria are for living in this property, and that's what the straightforward way to address the question.
There is an annual reporting requirement too, so whoever manages that is going to have to be responsible for the annual
I'm sorry.
reporting.
Well, that makes sense.
There's an annual reporting requirement as well.
Yeah, the ordinance seems, the ordinance seems to anticipate that the city will take action to form a housing authority to act as a receiver for those kinds of individual units.
Well, the best protection, and one that I think we should require when we have this kind of requirement, because it's almost self-executing. I mean, think of the superiority of a housing subsidy covenant over any other device. It goes in the land records. The buyer of the building, the next buyer of the building, is restrained by that covenant. That we should build that in. And if you need it, I'll get you the statutory site. It's the obvious thing to do. I wrote it 40 years ago. It's had a lot of good service in the intervening time, and that's what we should require in order to demonstrate. I assume we want permanent affordability, correct? That is the straightforward mechanism, and it doesn't require a lot of variation from project to project.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It'd be great if you could send that language before the next, so that I could share it with the applicant.
That would be great.
Some kind of deed covenant
Yeah.
or permit condition is going to govern this for a rental property. We're not anticipating sales where we have to have all the bylaws and decks in place. So the amount of paperwork I think we need to give you to sort of basically who is the responsible LLC or whatever, and just a reiteration of what's in the body of the law, which is annually as everybody else's rents going up, the inclusionary units are governed by whatever standard, HUD or VHFA that we're working with at the time. But yeah, I think that's the only way this gets finalized is it gets turned into some condition or,
Well, this housing subsidy covenant will contain a formula, right?
yeah. Which ought to mirror exactly the formula in the ordinance.
Which we can relate back to the HUD standards for affordability, because they're kind of permanent, right?
They're updated quarterly, I believe.
I didn't hear that.
I believe they're updated quarterly.
Fine.
Okay, and I think that ties into comment 13, which is draft legal documents. So if you guys want the covenant route, that would cover that, I think. So we'll share that with you. Comment 14 is about phasing. So there's no proposed phasing. So we just wanted to confirm the timeline for the construction of the inclusionary and market rate would happen all at once before a certificate of occupancy was issued.
So my question to that is, the intent is to build the entire project around the same time. So normally we would provide a phasing plan if we thought the back building wasn't going to be built for 5 years, so it was clear that we were going to build all the infrastructure required to support the rest of the building. So we can do a master plan if needed, but I was just wondering, is there somewhere in the regulation that tells us that we have to do that in order to... And if we don't, we would have to build all of the buildings and before we could occupy any of them?
Right, so without separate plans for which to inspect for full compliance with the site plan approval, it would all have to be done at once. It doesn't require a master plan to add some phasing. What it would require is a couple extra sheets that shows what the ground conditions would have to be at the end of each phase. And the board could include a condition of approval that says, phase one, need to get a zoning permit within 6 months, and then the zoning permit for the final phase within 18 months, or whatever, the board agreed to and you guys had asked for. So it's a couple extra sheets, but I don't think, it may be a good safeguard if you are hoping to occupy the buildings, not exactly concurrently.
Yeah, I think, right, we don't plan on magically completing them all in the same day and then occupying them. I guess my concern about providing the phasing is, besides the infrastructure and the road, we don't exactly know which of those buildings will be going for first or will be completed first. So I hate to provide a plan as part of this application package that says the bank building will be first. What if that gets delayed and we want to build a different building first?
We would be satisfied with temporary occupancy permits while the whole thing is in motion. Clearly, a 4-story building or 3 stories with a extended garage underneath, with the elevators and the lack of HVAC equipment, it's no longer readily available. Our mechanical engineers telling us 40 weeks for certain components. So we know the back building, even if it was the same size as the others, is going to take longer. It's not the same size, it's much bigger. The bank will have their own contractors working on site building their facility. We'll have a different set of contractors working on the small building, which is like 6,000 square feet. For us to get financing or to tell the bank that you can't actually open even if you're done because we don't have the elevator for the 3-story building and back.
Yeah, so let
But a
me
temporary
interrupt before you go
occupancy-
too far, because what we're really concerned about is the site, not the interior of the building. So if you think you can get all of the site work done and maybe the interior fit out not done, we'd be good with a temporary CO for the other buildings to be occupied, as long as the site work is complete.
Now, you find, well, depending on time of year, this project has been pushed back extensively, so we likely, or will be wintertime construction, landscaping will have to wait till a time of year when they can survive. Would the board be okay with a binder coat on asphalt to hold off on final paving until we had the correct weather conditions?
Yeah, so to answer the question about a temp CO can be issued when there's weather conditions or other out-of-control factors that are limiting some of the things, like paving or landscaping. So if that were to be the case, we could issue a temp CO, which would be valid for up to 6 months, at which time it would expire. And the idea is that 6 months is a long enough window that winter would become spring, become summer, and you could do the paving and the landscaping at that time. We don't do temp COs for things that aren't inclement weather, really. So,
So supply chain issues fall out of that?
yeah, correct. I think it's just,
The fact that the stuff isn't available?
right.
in the
But if you're talking about
marketplace.
just interior stuff, it wouldn't be a big deal. Our CO inspection would just be for the site, so we'd check to make sure your bike racks are in, your parking area is as it should be, but we wouldn't be too concerned at all, actually, with interior.
I think the crucial part of this whole conversation is getting to a place where we can have temporary COs for some of the buildings. I mean, that's what's important to us. And I guess the other thing that would help us is if we could have like phase A, B, and C and not necessarily 1, 2, and 3, because we may need some flexibility in terms of which building goes first.
That was gonna be my question about.
Yeah, so if you're talking about phasing any of the site elements, specifically landscaping budget, open space, that kind of thing, unless each phase stands alone, they do have to be sequential, but I assume they don't stand alone because, some of the landscaping for lot 3 is going to be on lot 1, for example. So isn't really, they're kind of cumulative. But if you're talking about just the interior of the buildings, from a planning and zoning perspective, we don't look at the interior of the buildings other than the long-term bicycle parking, right? That's it. So.
Understood.
So if you're waiting on an elevator or an HVAC system, that's not going to prevent you from getting a CO from us.
Understood.
But in this scenario, all 3 of the building exteriors would need to be built, or that could be done in an ABC scenario, or it doesn't matter what building is done?
If the site is done, then it could be ABC with the buildings themselves, like you don't have finishes on the buildings. But if you wanted to include the site elements in that ABC thing, then I think we would start to run into trouble.
I think the concern would be the landscaping and the elements around the large multifamily building can't be completed until the shell of that building is done. Because there's just too much construction access needed that would never survive.
Right.
And that building could take a year to 18 months longer in construction than the front buildings. And you're saying we have to keep those vacant for those 18 months.
And which is why we're suggesting that you might want to consider a phasing plan.
Right,
But even with a phasing plan, you're saying though that the landscaping is intermingled.
My suspicion is that you are going to provide the required minimum landscaping budget for lot 1 and 2 will be addressed on lots 1 and 2, and it's going to be lot 3 that spills over onto lots 1 and 2. So my suspicion is that if lot 3 is last, it's not going to be a problem. I can work with the engineer on figuring this out, but my suspicion is that it's not going to be a problem if 1 and 2 are sort of A, B, no particular order, and lot 3 is definitely last.
Okay, right. I would appreciate maybe some additional discussion on that after this meeting. I just want to make, lines on a plan sound super easy. I just want to make sure that in 2 years, Gary's not really upset with those lines that we put on the plan.
Yeah, and we have a few examples that we've done recently of this that have worked out well, so I'm happy to work with you guys.
Marla, do we require a site work / landscaping bond?
We do. Yep.
So as a practical matter, if that bond's big enough, that's reasonable assurance it gets done, right? Or is that a separate issue from what you're talking?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a separate.
Okay.
Well, is it though? I mean, if we've bonded for it, the money's there to do it.
Well, the bond is only a fraction of the total required cost.
Okay, so it's, in other words, they could theoretically, they could make a determination, well, it's $100,000 worth of landscaping, $10,000 bond, we can lose $10,000 and not spend the other 90.
Right. It's, the landscaping
So the
bond is supposed to be
What you're saying
for,
is our bond requirement is too small.
the bond requirement is for post-CO purposes. It's in case of landscaping dying, not in case of failure to
It's
install.
not surety for the initial construction,
Correct.
really. All right. So we have no bond, I got it,
We have a different kind of bond.
right.
Okay, so it sounds,
But do we have the authority? Because it seems to me this is not the only time the question has come up. And if nothing else, it's a bargaining chip. Do we have the authority to impose a bond requirement, do you think? A real bond requirement? A completion bond?
We certainly do for infrastructure, and we do impose one for infrastructure. I don't know if I know that the board has the authority to do anything to put anything the applicant volunteers to do, and which is a decision.
That would have to be done in consultation with our clients. A performance bond could be 1% of the cost of the job. It's not a free thing. There's a cost to providing those. And generally, the cost of the bond doesn't reflect the payout of a surety if they have to come and complete the project, you know.
Well, I mean, that's a matter of negotiation.
Right.
We could say if it's $100,000 landscaping, we want a $100,000 bond. And let's negotiate what the premium should be with the,
In the context of this discussion on finishing the project and getting occupancies and stuff, that's not unreasonable. I mean, because we may be coming to you and saying, what happens if we can't get our landscaping in until next March? So under those kinds of conditions, I see exactly where you're coming from.
I think it should be explored. But
Okay. So it sounds like next steps will, the applicant will look into phasing and work with staff on how to make that work.
I will.
Okay. Moving on to comment 15. Staff considers no further discussion on this item, so we'll move on from that.
And this is the ATM.
Is this the ATM? Can we
Oh, wait,
talk
sorry.
about that one, please?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was just looking at my highlight that was the determination. Yeah, so discussion of the ATM. So again, we are in an area where the drive-through is prohibited, but you all have done some homework to present how it adds to the goals of the PUD. I'll say that, and I'll give you the floor to discuss that.
Thank you. I know there are some strong opinions about this, but I had prepared to discuss, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to discuss this. So the ATM, one of the questions we heard at the last time that this was discussed in front of this board was a question about, well, even if we did want to allow this, how does this ATM support more efficient, compact, walkable, and well-planned forms of a residential neighborhood in a mixed-use or infill area? So that's what I'm prepared to talk about tonight. So I think one thing to point out is that an ATM drive-through is allowed in the underlying zoning district. So just as a refresher, this is kind of a weird case. If we were not proposing a PUD, this would be allowed. So there's ATM drive-throughs very close by this site and normally would be allowed. So there's that, but I do think how this supports a PUD and making it a better site is that the ATM in this particular location allows for there to be less of a need for someone to park to use the ATM if it were at the building. So in this case, if someone were to come in to use the drive-through, the ATM, they would just drive up, use it, and leave the site. They wouldn't necessarily be taking up one of the precious parking spaces on this site in order to utilize the ATM. So I do think that there is a way that this drive-through does support a more efficient use of space on this site. Parking is not allowed in the area where the ATM drive-through is on this site. So in this case, the ATM drive-up area provides an area that doesn't require additional parking on the site. I also think that just from a practicality standpoint, the ATM in this location does allow for greater accessibility and use for site users. That includes people with disabilities, elderly members of the community. and also people with young children. I know that I've had to take a toddler and a baby into a site, and I definitely, at that time in my life, were seeking out locations where there were drive-through opportunities, whether that be an ATM or a cup of coffee. So I do think there are scenarios where the ATM drive-through area is highly desired and needed by the community.
I think the other thing, to step back just a little bit on this, originally this project was brought forward in 2020, at the end of 2020 and then through 2021. So COVID, this was a while back. That's how long this job has been kicking around the offices, and Marla's had to deal with it. But the short story on it is, the planning board in an open Zoom meeting, which is still on the system, so if you get really bored or can't sleep at night, you can pull it up and watch it. It's a little dry, but it's very clear. This is January 25th, 2022, the planning board directing professional staff to bring back the PUDs for this project. They said it would be good if it was covering Williston Road, if it was covering Shelburne Road, but the whole conversation the night of the meeting was about this project. Now, they never mentioned me, so you won't hear my name, but you'll hear the addresses back and forth, that this creates an opportunity for the city and for the owner to work an arrangement where we could create what we've created here, which we think is a wonderful compromise and gets us all to where the city plan is telling us they want the city to go to. Now, there was no mention in that meeting on the 25th that, oh, give them the PUD or offer it, see if they'll take it. But then in January, Marla tells us there was a rule inserted that even though drive-throughs are allowed in this district, this bank could move across to Denny's or move the other way to Codo State Club and put in a drive-through. They can't do it on mine because we were directed, and it seems like a really good idea to us, by the planning board to go with a PUD, give up the curb cuts, give up the ancillary uses, cut the traffic count in this high traffic area, and this will get us through the process. So we have a project we're all proud of and is economically viable. So in February, that rule was yanked out. We didn't notice it as the applicant, which is on us. We should be all-knowing and all-seeing, but the rules are quite complex, and there's some contradiction or some confusion between rules when you go from page to page. But we missed it. Staff brought it to our attention the Wednesday before the last time we actually met in person. So we did have about 5 days' notice that, oh, by the way, even though you've already been through one phase of your permitting, and we got through sketch plan, and even though these plans were pretty evolved in 2021, before the planning board stepped in and said, create a PUD for this type of project, those plans all had the drive-up ATM, not a drive-through pay window or with a tube with money. Just drive up, get your money, don't have to get out of the car, continue on. What we're asking here is, while it's not automatic, like it would be if this bank moved to Codo or moved to the Denny's, where it is automatic, they just simply have to draw it in and meet the stacking requirements. It isn't automatic, but the planning board was kind enough to give you the ability to okay this, but you have to vote in the affirmative that you want it. This is very important to this project. We've taken the PUD as it was described to us, and that may not have been incorrect. If it's not incorrect, that's on me. But we took it as, if you do the whole thing and give these items up, create something that's walkable, something that's less impact on the streets, cut the traffic count, we'll work with you. Now, one of the big asks was we need 2 stories, even though in staff notes, they tell you that Shelburne Road is one of the busiest roads, 6 lanes in the state of Vermont, will never be city center here in Burlington. So staff tells us this. We went along with it. They acknowledge it will never be that way down the street, but we did it anyway. That's part of the reason why we stuffed 3 units in above that, to try to justify the height of the building. And we've given you, if you look at the graphics that we've handed out, it's a good-looking 2-story building. It will look great when you come off the interstate. It will give the view that I think the city's planners were thinking of when they created these rules. But we need this drive-through. We really do. And we think it's a small ask. If it wasn't allowed anywhere else in here, I'd say That's not reasonable. You show up here, it's not even allowed in this part of the city. It's allowed everywhere in this part of the city, except now, my project.
But even it would even be allowed on this site if we weren't proposing a PUD and we were just coming in to develop the existing single lot that exists on the corner of Shelburne and Swift. We could be proposing an ATM. Right, and in this case, we feel like the project is better, but we're sort of shooting ourselves in the foot by doing a PUD.
Well, wait a minute, you're also getting 2 more buildings, right?
And we're also
We
giving up
haven't
the
started
curb
with 3
cuts
buildings,
and.
Frank.
Huh?
We've got 3 buildings today, Frank.
Right.
So we're not getting,
But-
I'm
well,
sorry, we've got 3 buildings now. We're not gaining any buildings. We're changing out the usage. But we're giving up the curb cuts and stuff, because we think what we've proposed, and staff has been very involved in a lot of these changes, and the engineers working for me have put a lot of work into looking at the regs. Heck, in 2020, I paid Greg to present several different visions to Paul to get an idea, not that, oh, this is going to get me a permit. No, that was not the conversation. The conversation with Paul was, in the planning department, was, of these, what seems like better fits. And we took the project from there forward. No guarantee of a permit, but that's where this all started.
I'd like to get a few things clarified, some from you and some from Marla, if you can be patient with me. From you, when you say it's very important to the project, I think what you mean, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what I heard you say is the bank really wants this and you're risking the tenant if you don't give them the drive-through? Is that why it's important to the project?
Yes, the economics
Other
need to
reason-
work here.
There's no other reason it's important to the project.
Well, it works in this part because it brings good things to the site.
It what?
It brings good activities to the site. You don't have to get out of the car. We're dealing with a handicap. The
But
crime rate
mostly-
being what it is, I think it's a very positive thing for the project, and it's not a big focal point as far as driving by for the motoring public.
My question for Marla is the prohibition, is it correct that the only reason it's not available to them is because it's a PUD?
That's correct.
And is that a general rule for PUDs or only in this particular overlay?
General rule in PUDs,
Citywide, right?
yes.
Without regard to whether they're on Shelburne Road or somewhere buried in the southeast quadrant?
15C01, yes, that's correct.
I think it's something we ought to discuss, maybe not here.
Yeah,
Maybe-
so
maybe in
my sense of the board at the last meeting was the board said, PUDs are prohibited, we do not, please remove the PUD from the plans. The applicant saying that they heard otherwise, but I walked away from the last meeting hearing that this was a closed issue. You know, they've made their case, you certainly can discuss it further, but I don't want to go down the road of having, how can I phrase this? I don't want to go down the road of leaving the applicant with false hope and having strung out meetings where in the end they are feeling like there's still a door open and the board feels like the door has long since been closed. We've seen that that's not a comfortable situation on other projects. So if the board is feeling that the door may still be open, that's okay. You know, as Gary said, it is allowed in this zoning district, but for the fact that it's a PUD. But if the board feels like this is not in support of a more efficient, compact, walkable, and well-planned form of residential neighborhood, mixed-use, and infill development, then there is no authority to modify the standard to allow PUDs, and the board should unequivocally say, remove the ATM from the plan.
But I think it's clear that it does support a more cohesive development and meet that criteria, because if we just pulled the application and came back in with Chase Bank on the corner, we could do that tomorrow with an ATM.
But
So
we'd
by
have to
doing the
take back the
PUD
curb cuts, which is
Right.
what,
By doing the PUD, we are doing a lot of good things and making the project better overall, I think. It just seems weird to have to shoot ourselves in the foot because we're doing a PUD. It just seems like a weird use of that mechanism. And it's pretty odd. It's pretty odd. We should have caught it earlier as well, but everybody missed it initially because it's weird. It isn't,
We've watched the tapes from the planning meetings because they're in the record, so you can just bring them up. And we're not finding where the planning board ever asked for this. So it surprised us right out of the blue, only because while we didn't attend those meetings, because they record them, we played them. Likewise, the last meeting here where this matter was discussed, it's in the public record. Just if you get really bored, play it, and you'll see that we didn't agree. We said, we were sent away with, come back with a better argument, because it isn't flying. But at that point, we hadn't had a chance to dig into it enough to know. Marla, do you recall why this was put in so soon after the public meeting the planning board had? Why this specific rule? It's a one-liner that was popped in there.
I'm not involved with rules writing. I don't get involved in the planning commission at all, so I don't have any information on that. If I could postulate a little bit, I would, based on only reading the LDR, I read this in the same way that I read the prohibition on new gas stations on Shelburne Road. It seems to me, and I'm basing this solely on a strict reading of the LDR and not any insider knowledge, it seems to me that this is one of those things where the Planning Commission is attempting to sunset drive-throughs in the same way that they are attempting to sunset gas stations along Shelburne Road by saying no new gas stations, no new ATMs, or no new drive-throughs.
No new drive-throughs in a PUD.
Right.
You can build them at Koto, you can build them on all three sides of us. You cannot build any new gas stations. That's a different rule. It's apples and oranges.
I would jump in and say that we did see a project probably 4 months ago for the Unos on Shelburne Road, the old Unos. And there was a proposal to put a bank there, and the urban design overlay, perhaps to kind of build off of Marla's point, the urban design overlay prohibits drive-through lanes through the front of a building. You can do them to the rear or side still, but you have to have that same thing that you're working with, a direct pedestrian-oriented connection between the street and the use. So that project ended up being sunk because they couldn't figure a way to put the drive-through to either the rear or side of the building. And so that's another sort of way that drive-throughs are sort of being pushed out of our more focal parts of town.
Well, I'm very pleased that the designers were able to put this behind the building, so thank goodness, because otherwise we'd suffer the same course as the Uno's property. So it does meet the criteria. It's not akin to a gas station. We're trying to get rid of the gas station.
and
Well, maybe you ought to go back to the bank and persuade them a walk-up's good enough.
Just to clarify, is this ATM, I assume it's solely a drive-up. Is there also a walk-up with this facility, or is it just the drive-through?
it's just the drive.
Just the drive-through. But like any drive-through, you can step up to it just as you can with any bank. If you're coming down the bike path, you can whip over to it and get your money.
None of the stuff about activity on the site I find persuasive. I mean, I don't find it persuasive. The only thing persuasive is the risk of losing a, blue-chip tenant. And I understand your desire in that respect. On the other hand, I think Marla's probably right. It's in there for a reason. They don't want new they don't want new ATMs. Now, eventually, maybe Denny's gets rezoned at some point when Denny's moves out. I don't know. I don't know how the progress of that goes.
But the underlying zoning does allow it. So if we pulled this application and didn't propose this as a PUD and developed it as 3 separate parcels, tomorrow we could come in with an application for Chase Bank with a drive-through in the rear of the building, I believe.
Right, and the advantage of doing it as a PUD is that it allows you to reconfigure the sites in a way that wouldn't allow this site configuration if you did it as 3 separate sites, right? I mean, because the lots would be, I think the front lots would be bigger and the back lot would be smaller under existing conditions, right? So it'd be a different application.
Right, so I think that sort of proves why we think it's better for the PUD to do it as a cohesive project than to just come in solo for the corner lot and develop it as a bank or whatever else Gary chooses to do in the future. I think there's advantages, not just for us and not just for Chase Bank. There's advantages to everybody for it to be designed as a PUD. It's just a really weird thing to be included in the PUD regulations.
Could you put the graphics up, please, for me, for the finished
Problem is,
project?
there's no advantage to anybody but the bank that I can see of having a drive-through.
The public, the general public, mothers, disabled people, people who don't like to get out of their cars in the middle of the winter in Vermont. There's a lot of people that fall under that category that will take advantage of that.
The advantage to the city is the project you see on the screen. The project needs to be economical. Now, the bank approached the city prior to approaching me. After they felt that from what they learned from the planning department, that's when they finally came to me and said, can we make an arrangement? This seems like this may work for us. This project was structured knowing what we know about the intricacies and the complications of South Burlington zoning and trying to address those. It's a very good-looking project. When I read the specs that staff has been good enough to keep sending over to us, this addresses a lot of that. We made it in a big housing component. There was a big sales pitch from the city that if you make it a PUD, include all this, you can do this many units. When they pulled the PUD, we can only put 8 units in back. Well, the math doesn't work on 8 units for a building that costs, with the sprinklers and everything else. The math didn't work. It does work at 27, even with the inclusionary requirements, which we will meet. But it's a good-looking project. If you could put the other project up, please, for a moment, the existing. This is what you've got now. And if you leave it out wide so you can see around us, the neighborhood buildings eventually will face the planning process and we'll upgrade it. But you've taken a big chunk at the entrance to it. If you go down the road, there's other sections where it has been, zoning has kicked in, you've got newer buildings, so the street is evolving. The gas station is from the 1950s, that's 70 years ago. This layout that we're proposing gets us for the next 50 or 60, maybe 70 years, because it fits. It's environmentally, it's a good setup. It creates what we need to make this happen. Can we renovate these structures? Yes. The back building is concrete block with steel girders. It can be renovated in place. It will be economical. But we thought this was our chance to convert it over. We've given up the ramps. We knew we had to give up a lot. We gave up the gas station. We give up the entrances. We combine it all so it flows. I think it's going to be a really good-looking property. And we've tried to listen to anything that's been brought to us as far as what people wanted proposed. A drive-up, for this one, it shows up late in the day. I don't understand, with so many sets of prints kicking around, magically, we end up with this. I don't care for that.
I know this is an important issue. I think we've heard testimony on it, and I'm not hearing anything new, but I appreciate, the context and everything. So is the board in the position to take the hard stance on this and say, it's not allowed in the PUD, update your plans? Or is this something that we want to discuss in deliberative session, and keeping in mind Marla's point of if we don't see backtracking on this, we should not do so.
I just think that given there's 3 board members who are not here tonight, I think that we should take it up in deliberative session and give them each an opportunity to also discuss based on what we have.
Yeah, and I'm leaning that way towards as well, just to be able to process it as well. So we will take this up in deliberative session. We know, we appreciate your additional testimony on this, and we'll move forward.
Can I make a suggestion for deliberations? I know deliberations are closed, but the board can vote to share information with the applicant. If that's a conversation we can have either tonight after everybody leaves or before the next, well, I guess if we want other people's. Before the next meeting, if board members feel comfortable, I would appreciate being able to share the conclusion of that conversation before we see them again.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think that's a
appreciate
good idea. I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
I think it's a real good idea, because, I mean, I'm having a deliberative session all by myself.
I feel the same way.
Back and forth. I have a suggestion to the applicant. Again, look, we face this difficulty time and time and time again. Something gets written. If you violate what's written, you're opening the doors. You know, eventually, you'll go down a slippery slope and you have no regulation anymore. On the other hand, some things are just dumb. I'm not sure this falls into that category, however. My suggestion to you, and I'd appreciate if you did, is write down succinctly, with no BS, what you think the benefits to the PUD are and to the immediate neighborhood are of keeping it as a drive-through.
We could do that and submit that.
One sheet of paper presumably would do the trick, but as compact and as hard-hitting as you can make it without too many words.
We can do that. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss it and for the opportunity to have you discuss it further.
That's what I understand our rationale is, correct? If we decide to, oh, Marla.
Right.
I know you're exasperated. It's okay.
One other thing I'll mention, following up on my previous question, what I'm having trouble with is you're asking for a waiver to allow a vehicle-only access to an amenity that doesn't exist for pedestrians. Because I don't think asking people to stand in the middle of the road to access the ATM is really where we want to go.
It's not the middle of the road, it is
Well,
an
you've got a traffic lane, it's designed for cars, it's marked for cars. I wouldn't really want to stand in the middle of the drive-through lane to get my money, hoping that somebody's paying enough attention I don't get hit.
So are you saying it's anti?
I would encourage you maybe to look at, the idea is to make it more pedestrian-friendly. So is there some other way? I would feel more comfortable if there were another facility that pedestrians could use, or it was designed in a way that pedestrians could also use it safely without telling them to stand in the middle of the road.
That's an interesting perspective. We'll certainly take that into consideration with our one-pager.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I mean, one of the things that's doesn't operate in your favor from the standpoint of operation, just looking at the design, looking at that picture. Basically, you're creating another road behind the frontage buildings. You can see them coming in from Swift Street and driving right through the parking lot and out on the Shelburne Road.
It is a slip lane, and we have designed, I don't think that rendering fully shows all of the plantings proposed out there. There is a small retaining wall in that area, which is showed in some of the other renderings, and there is some additional landscaping there. So there is some screening intended to be provided.
Okay, I'm going to suggest we move on because I want to make sure that we get through everything, at least as a first pass, so that you guys have good marching orders for our next meeting.
Yes, thank you. All right, comment 16, this is about the Solar Ready. So we would be looking for demonstration on how these standards in Appendix CA will be met prior to closing the hearing. It sounds like that was doable. We discussed it earlier. Okay, this next comment is about having a mix of dwelling unit types. So currently, there's 30 units proposed, of which 29 will be 2 bedrooms and 1 is a 1-bedroom. That's not the most mixed of units, so we're just looking for a response on that point.
The city's been approving, in fact, in just recent weeks, has approved a number of buildings where the units aren't mixed. So we're needing to stay with this for efficiency of construction.
This is a new standard
Okay.
This is a new standard?
with this February 22 LDR. I don't think we've approved any large buildings under that standard yet.
Well, these need to be efficient. This thing has become nip and tuck. We've got 2 different sizes of 2s, 2-bedroom units. And
What are those sizes?
past experience
Jerry?
is showing us that with some professionals on the market units, singles end up renting a two-bedroom if they can afford it, using one for an office. So it's,
What
but
are
they
the
don't
two
want a
sizes
one-bedroom.
that you have?
pardon?
What are the two sizes of the two bedrooms?
Oh, is the footage on the two bedrooms? Come up here. Sorry.
Similar to what I mentioned earlier, your standard two-bedroom unit is 975 square feet or something like that. The inclusionary units are slightly smaller because we eliminated one of the two bathrooms and we made the footprint a little bit smaller. So you have a two-bedroom, two-bath, two-bedroom, one-bath, one-bedroom, one-bath. So the variety's coming in the scales and the rent side, and the rent rolls. Very difficult to run 3- and 4-bedroom apartments unless you have professional on-site management. Family scale units are a little more difficult to manage because you don't always get families. Sometimes you get a lot of unrelated adults living together. But that was our recommendation to them.
What does
far
the
as-
board think about the mix? Is this mixed enough, given the inclusionary market rate and one bedroom? Or would the board like to see, I'm not necessarily saying that it needs to be 3 and 4 bedrooms. Maybe it's, some of the 2 bedrooms get converted to 1 bedrooms. What does the board think?
I have a question first. What does Article 15C say? Is this a planned unit development approved under Article 15C?
Yes,
Yes?
yes.
So what are the standards, are there standards for mix under Article 15C?
No, so 15C 05 and 06 are the conservation PUDs and the neighborhood development PUDs. This is developed under 15C 7, which is a general PUD, which does not have specific standards for a mix.
Okay.
It's clear as mud, right?
I don't want to provide an opinion here, but this one is, it says here, a mix of dwelling unit types must be provided within neighborhoods and developments. It seems like it's more speaking towards like a subdivision style PUD and perhaps less about the contents of one apartment building, but more like if you're going to do a South Village, it can't be all single family. That's how I read this, and I don't mean to be on the DRB. I just wanted to flag that quickly, and also I know there's been conversations somewhat in that all 1 bedrooms, all studios is a cheap way for developers to go, and perhaps not great for South Burlington housing stock, cramming everyone into 1 bedrooms and studios. So, that's another maybe thing to consider.
Thanks, Marty.
I don't know, well, what would you prefer as a mix? Do you want to see 3-bedroom units? Is that what you're talking about? Some bigger ones?
It's up
Because-
to you guys. I mean, the standard says a mix of dwelling unit types and a mix of architectural features and styles must be provided within neighborhoods and developments.
It
So-
says dwelling unit types, and it says cottage, single-family, 2-family, small multifamily, townhouse. Well, these are apartments. I mean, it doesn't further subdivide it, right? Into unit types. What I'm getting at is I think what they've done here is a reasonable commercial neighborhood mix. You have, when you say a two-unit apartment is 900 square feet, that's not exactly a mansion. That could be occupied by 2 people, it could be occupied by 3 people, it could be occupied by 1 person with an office. A single professional person could rent a 2-bedroom apartment, have an office in their apartment. A small family could have a couple in 1 room, 1 or even 2 kids in the other room. It's a high utility mix to me, and I find it hard to argue with. If it was 29 1-bedroom,
Yeah.
I would have a different view of it, like that thing that Larkin wants to go. There's another one proposed for like postage stamps for people who don't want to be in a cardboard box, are going to take a step up. You know, but this is high utility.
Frank, I would agree with you, so I would tend towards the criterion being met with that type of mix that's possible, and I think, to Marty's point, that it looks for other variations that we're not seeing here since it's a building. So I would agree and not direct the applicant to change, but if other board members want to weigh in as well. Okay, I think we've given you direction. All right, moving to comment 18. This is pedestrian orientation. Staff considers that pedestrian access could be improved to the multifamily building, both from Swift Street, and recommends the board direct the applicant to modify the plans to provide a more direct pedestrian route from Shelburne Road to the multifamily building. It might be helpful if we could bring up a site plan on this one.
Yeah, the concern here was that if you live in the multifamily building, the sidewalk from the multifamily building sort of stops at the edge of the lot and doesn't extend all the way to Shelburne Road.
Yeah. Do you all have, I'm just looking at this and I'm thinking the same. If you wanted to walk off to Shelburne Road, you're walking through the parking lot. It might not be the most safe. So any thoughts to kind of make that pedestrian connection a little bit more?
I think that we could provide the sidewalk along the south side of the mixed-use building. I don't think this is something that we've designed it like this because it's a tight site, but we understand if that is something that you would like. It's not that hard for us to accommodate that request.
Yeah.
So
Would that include a striped crosswalk or something in the drive lane?
In the open part, we could stripe it.
I think there
but
should
then
be.
concrete up to it and then concrete.
I think that sounds like it would be sufficient and a good use of, making sure the site can work. So
do that. Thank you.
great. All right, comment 19. So this is regarding privacy. So original comment is if the board discuss whether they would like to see an improvement to the appearance of the east side of the multifamily building in consideration for future redevelopment of the adjoining site. And the update is that the updates to elevations have added interest to the side of the building and recommends the board consider whether this criterion is now met. Keep in mind there is insufficient room to provide significant screening. So could we see that revised elevation that includes the bump out and setbacks?
It requires visualization beyond my powers.
Should be with the renderings.
About their proposed east side changes. How much room is back? I mean, I think the point is well taken,
There is
How
not
much
a lot of
room is back there?
10 feet.
Between the back of the building and the lot line?
10 feet,
And then what's immediately on the other side of the lot line?
parking lots.
Pardon?
Parking lots, for there's a large building behind.
Yeah.
But how,
Distribution in place.
I mean, what I'm trying to visualize is a practical matter going forward. Will the next guy over, does he have room to put up his own screening without impairing the utility of that lot?
Is it up under the visual Rabideau tab?
Maybe, I'm just checking my email from Lucy real quick. I think she had it here.
Also, sorry, didn't mean to send you on a goose chase.
I think that I probably sent that to Marla. I could try and send it to you again right now really fast,
That's all
Marnie.
right. I have it. I'll take over sharing. East elevation. So this is the side on the top of the screen here that would face the adjoining property. Oops, sorry, meant to zoom in.
There should be a visual rendering of that side of the building somewhere in the new packet.
I bet there is, but in the interest of time, we're not going to get there.
We're not going to see it tonight.
So before it was flat. And so to compare kind of a side-by-side on the site plan, I can do this. Overall site plan, how did a second ago? What is all this stuff? So you can see that it's pretty close. Pretty close to the lot line over here. So there is room, there's, room for a little bit of screening, but if these folks who live in this side of the building want any sort of sunlight, probably not a great idea to put a lot of screening in there, which is why we had suggested that maybe a more interesting side of the building would be a nice way to make this a more desirable place to live in the future when it's redeveloped.
So is that a tree line that's there now?
It's kind of a
On the other
scrubby.
property? What is that?
I think it's just lawn, I think it's just lawns on the other side, the neighbors.
I think there's some shrubs. It's
Just dirt?
There are some shrubs existing. They're currently kind of sumac type of material, but just naturally growing on, adjacent to the parking lot.
So given the site configuration and the fact that the board has previously felt pretty comfortable with the location of the building, staff was not suggesting that more room be made for screening. Staff was just suggesting that in lieu of screening, the building be made somewhat interesting.
It seems like that's been accomplished, so I would have no further. Any other thoughts, board?
So everybody feel good about this?
Any other thoughts on this one, or? Given that, again, the kind of restriction of the site, staff was trying to get at improving how the building looked. It appears like that's been done. Any further direction to the applicant? You guys were just,
I'm not going to pretend I can visualize it.
Okay.
I just can't.
okay, that's fine. Then I just wanted, you guys were processing, so I want to make sure any thoughts were put out there. Okay, so moving on to comment 20. This is about the amenities that are on site. So staff recommends the board confirm they are comfortable with the site amenity locations with respect to the amenities being considered on an overall PUD basis and with one amenity being split between two parcels. We do have this visual up. If you might just briefly give us an overview of the three areas that are highlighted in green.
So I think, this sort of is related to the overall PUD vibe that we're going for here. We're trying to make it cohesive so that the entire site fit together. So these three areas were selected and preserved to really be an open space, each of them open spaces on their own that could be used by people who lived and worked in this area. So we think that these three locations are the locations that make the most sense. They don't split up perfectly amongst the three lots. They're really There's one between the two buildings up front, and then really the heavier use at this site is the large apartment building, so that has a more focused open space on the west side of the building. And then there's a little pocket open space that's a really nice pergola and some benches that match the rest of the site in the area towards Swift Street where the drop-off and pickup area is proposed to be. So we're proposing this because we think it fits the site best, not necessarily that it lines up with the lots perfectly.
Given the layout of this site, I think the split amenity between the two buildings, the non-residential buildings work. It looks like that was one of the cruxes of the staff comment. Other thoughts?
I didn't realize that was a pergola. I thought those lines were some sort of subsurface infiltration system up until this very moment.
It's going to be great.
That being said, I need to look into whether that's going to be considered an accessory structure in the front yard and be prohibited.
Okay.
We can also talk about that. But in general, I think the locations for the open space.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're good with the locations. I will
Okay,
look into the
great.
pergola.
Okay,
Excellent.
I hope we can keep it because I think it'll look great.
Marla, I have a question that's just brought out by this particular diagram. I mean, I'm assuming, and I take the applicant's point, look what we got there now, but I assume that the lot coverage is just massive, but I guess it already is that right?
No, in the case of a complete redevelopment, the existing conditions don't matter. So this project does meet coverage requirements. Well, I don't know if it meets, but
Does it increase the impermeable surface?
that is in the beginning of the staff report. Let's see.
All right.
But not as much.
It's an aside. I don't want to take up more time with it now. It's okay. It just was striking when I saw the little bit of green and the big sea of gray.
That diagram's a little misleading, though, in that those green boxes are in the context of much larger green areas.
Right.
Those are just the focused areas that are determined to be special amenities. There's a lot more green there than that diagram shows.
That's right.
Great. All right, I am going to move on to comment 21. So this is, so the northern amenity space will need to be, or we're not asking for the 8-foot pedestrian sidewalk anymore, so that will not need to be altered. So we're all set with number 21.
Great, thank you.
22, no further discussion is needed as indicated by staff. 23, comment 23 is speaking to comments from the Director of Public Works and the Director of Capital Planning, and some of these comments still need to be addressed. So that's just something that you guys will be able to work out with staff.
Yes.
And 24, this is trip generation.
We did submit, go ahead, sorry.
Yep, go ahead.
We did submit an updated memo to address some of the concerns that were brought up in the original comments, which we submitted recently.
Okay, so we'll look into that. My concern here is that some of these comments may affect the trip generation, and you are on the hairy edge of having a problem with trip generation. So I don't know if addressing the comments is going to adjust the trip generation up or down, or adjust the existing trip generation up or down, but I just want to be clear that given these comments, I don't think that we are 100% certain that we are in the clear on traffic yet. But if I haven't reviewed your revised stuff, so perhaps
Yeah.
we are now 100% in the clear.
I feel like we are in the clear. We're lucky enough to have Roger Dickinson, an expert traffic engineer at our office these days, and he did take a good look into these comments. We provided some responses, but he also did apply some of those more conservative rates to his numbers, and this is where we wound up. So I feel comfortable with it, but I understand you still need to take a look.
I have a question
Yes.
for you about traffic. It says, update 4/4/2023, the applicant has testified, existing PM peak hour VTEs is 124. Really? I mean, right now, it should be close to zero, right, through that area?
Yeah, so the LDRs are,
Once authorized for 124, all right, I
Yeah.
get that, all right. But then that wasn't my main point. You said the proposed PM peak hour VTEs is 120. Does that assume you have the drive-in authorized?
I would have to take a look into the numbers about whether or not that changes the numbers. I'm not sure that it does.
How can it not?
I guess maybe it does, right, because it would be maybe adjusted down if it was just a bank with no ATM. Although if it had, if it had an ATM at the side of the building, right. There's different, in the ITE, the manual for calculating it, there's a rate associated with each type of use. I don't know what those rates are off the
ITE
top of my
has
head.
a method for calculating the trips for an ATM?
For each type of use, so there's things like,
there's things like
a
a bank.
donut shop versus a,
Yeah, or a bank with a drive-through and a bank without a drive-through. There'll
Right.
be different calculation methods.
And this is just a naked drive-through, right?
Well, there's a bank.
Pardon?
It's associated with the bank.
Oh, no, there is a bank building there.
Yeah.
Okay, right. All right. So do you know the answer, Marla, whether this 120 includes the drive-in or drive-through or not?
Let me put it this way, it better.
yes.
Because
I'm
that's
sure-
their submission.
Yes, I'm sure it accounts for that, but whether or not, I guess, I don't know if the top of my head was what I was trying to articulate. What is the count difference between both of those slightly different uses? It's still a bank. So yes, the numbers are probably slightly different. I just don't know exactly what they are without looking in the manual.
All right. Moving on to staff comment 25. There are some parking spaces located approximately within 18 feet of Shelburne Road. And staff has noted there is insufficient space for a typical car entering the site to maneuver in or out of these spaces without being in the sidewalk. So we want to look at this and see if it might be appropriate to recommend removing one parking space to allow more room for that.
Our preference is that would be a really good spot for one of the employees, perhaps at the first building, because it's right there, and coming in at that time of day. The traffic flow through this site, especially early morning and late in the day, of people entering the site will be minimal. It'll be the apartment dwellers exiting the site. So I do feel that it's a valuable space. We'd like to keep the space. We've got a nice green patch next to it. So as far as visual from Shelburne Road, I think we've kind of got that covered, but I really don't want to give up the spaces.
Well, we just saw that it's 120 trips, though. I mean, I think it's disingenuous to say that it's a low trip generation.
Yeah, and I think our position is just that, parking spaces are precious on this site, and I know that if I was pulling in off Shelburne Road, that wouldn't be my first choice for a parking space, but if you're coming in from the other direction, it would be fine. So I do think that there's a way that it could be utilized by an employee of one of the businesses where there wouldn't be someone coming in and out all of the time, like one of the spaces in front of the bank. This would be ideally utilized by an employee of one of the businesses. I'm just not sure that it's a safety hazard. It is inconvenient if you're pulling in from Shelburne Road into the site to use that for space, but nothing about that space requires you to use it.
I don't have strong thoughts on this. 'Cause
Stephanie, this is kind of in your bailiwick.
I know. I'm thinking, I'm in thought here. So I agree that coming in, like you could easily drive in back into that space. My concern is more about someone exiting that parking space with someone coming in off of Shelburne Road. That creates a conflict point.
Right. So I think that's why Gary had mentioned that maybe if it's okay with you, we could propose to leave it and then identify it as employee-only parking for one of the businesses in the mixed-use building.
I guess my question is, how would turning it into employee-only parking change any risk factor for a conflict?
Just because they'd be coming in once a day,
Once
early
a
in the
day,
morning,
yeah, no,
parking.
I agree with that. I think
Right.
it still poses the same conflict issue.
Well, if it was somebody who was working the site, then after the first few trips into to go to work, they would understand how the traffic flow worked. So it wouldn't be somebody who wasn't thinking about it because they grabbed the space. I think if it was an employee parking space, they would know, okay, take a good look around before you back out or back in and drive out.
Yeah, I think that the risk is still there. That's my only comment for that.
This is something to think about in deliberations. I mean, it's an easy thing to take off the plan. If the board says, take it off the plan, it's,
And I guess my one question around that is the board directing to designate employee-only spaces. Is that, I mean, they're volunteering to do that, so I guess that would be
right.
something we could do.
Yeah, so I think there is another staff comment about the number of designated parking spaces.
Yes, yeah. I didn't see
So
that.
we'll get to that as well.
Okay. Yeah, so we will discuss that in deliberation. A question, or comment 26. So there is a concept to provide a recreation path along Swift Street, which we have discussed. So the staff recommends the board require the applicant to modify the plans to provide a recreation path along Swift Street. Should be reflected in the plans provided to V-Trans for the section 1111 permit. And so that's just, sorry, just to clarify, that's just updating the plans to show the rec pack that's anticipated on Swift Street.
Right. And
Okay.
Lucy did meet with the Deputy Director of Capital Projects regarding this issue. There was a question for us about space and where exactly that would go, but we've since worked that out, and we can show that on the revised set of site plans.
All right, excellent, thank you. Comment 27 is the Water District comments. They're not included here because they're extensive, but those will need to be addressed as well.
Yes, we can address those comments as part of the next application.
Excellent.
And I did remember to include those in the packet. You have them.
Yes, I have
Okay,
them.
great.
Oh, I'm sorry, they weren't included on the staff report, sorry, did mistake.
No, but sometimes I say that I'm going to include things and then I forget.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great.
Comment 28, staff considers no further discussion required. And moving on. Okay, and so now we come to the other comment about reserved parking spaces. So the assumption is that residential parking spaces are not reserved, therefore no additional guest spaces are required, and we were looking for confirmation on if this is.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we're good with that.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, and now we are on comment 30. So there are some reserved spaces currently on the plan?
Correct for the, excuse me, correct for the bank.
Yep. Okay. And so to allow for that, there's criteria 1 through 5 listed above the staff comment that should be met. Can you speak to having those reserved spots and how it meets these criteria?
Yes, I think specifically regarding number 4, part of the reason they are labeled as reserved for the business is because they are a business and there's other uses on the property that could potentially dominate other parking areas. And I think, Chase Bank specifically was looking for some reserved spaces to make sure that customers could access the site if they wanted to.
So just to clarify for the board, they're proposing to reserve 11 spaces for the bank. 63 parking spaces are proposed. Jen, do you remember off the top of your head how many are in the garage?
27?
Okay, so
27.
63 minus 27 is 40, 30, 38? No, 36? 36, and so 11 of those 36 surface parking spaces are proposed to be reserved for the bank. Number 4 that they're asking for consideration on is to provide a minimal number of spaces for a small commercial business.
Yeah, I would, thank you for making that point. So surface parking spaces, that's about almost a third. So I would direct the applicant to provide less than 11. Seems like a large amount for if you're relying on that criteria, which is to provide a minimal number of spaces.
I think the 11 would be a mixed of some of those. Some of those would be handicap. The symbols are already in place.
That's true.
Some would be 15-minute drop-off pickup. Some would be for the employees, and we're not so much, well, even for the employees. But it's during bank hours on bank days that they're open. These spaces will be available for the apartments, unfortunately for us, for Denny's and for the Kodos, nights, weekends, and the rest of the time. I don't think 11 is a big ask for the business, given that we do need to have the mix. So it's during business hours, which I presume is an 8 to 5 situation, but that's just guessing.
Yeah.
I guess you asked part of the question already. What's the total number of spaces available?
Let me look.
63.
Thank you.
45 of them are surface.
63 total. There's 27 in the garage. So that is skewing maybe the visual on this. This plan that we're looking at doesn't show all of the additional 27 spaces under the building. So there is quite a bit more parking associated with the residential building there. Yes, primarily that would be for tenants. But when you consider the additional spaces in the garage, it's not all that excessive,
Well,
I
wait a
don't
minute,
think.
the garage, you're saying there's 27 spaces under the building, so that's less than one space per unit as for what you hope to build there, right? That's like 9/10 of a space per unit roughly.
There's 27 units and 27
I thought
parking
you were trying to
spaces.
get to 30?
They're in the other building.
Oh, the other building.
They're in the other building has 3.
So,
So the stand,
basically, you're providing one parking space per residential unit, roughly?
In the garage, yes.
How about in the project as a whole? Less than that?
Oh, more than, how many more?
well, so the minimum required so the LDRs do have a minimum parking space requirement for multifamily buildings. You'll be glad to know.
And do they meet it?
They are required to provide, yes, they do meet it. They're required to provide 45 parking spaces for the residential use. So 63 minus 45 is 18. So they're proposing to reserve 11 of their 18 non-residential spaces for one of their tenants. And the remaining would be available for the other tenant.
But we're not,
But also
Designating
nights and
those as-
weekends, it would be available to the tenants, right?
right, there will be some, shared parking considerations for the businesses versus the residential uses is one thing.
But that's not what the plans say. They say reserved for financial institution use. Should they say reserved for non-residential or something?
I was referring back to the point that we don't have specific spaces on the site designated as residential only.
And what is the board's thoughts on having 11 spaces reserved for the bank?
Seems excessive.
I think that my biggest concern would be for operating hours on Saturdays, because I feel like the banks are usually operating Saturday mornings, and a lot of the people will be at their residence at that time. And if the other commercial property is also open on a Saturday, I think it becomes a Saturday morning more concern. I think, you know, during the week, I'm less concerned with it because a lot of the tenants will likely go to work. So I think the opportunity to have more open spaces on the lot will be there. And I do like the idea of having the shared residential and commercial use lots. I think that that makes sense in a, you know, situation like this where there is limited available parking spaces. But I think I do have a little bit of concern for just for the number and for Saturday. And then what kind of enforcement mechanism ends up happening on a Saturday if someone doesn't get up and move their car by 9 a.m. when the bank opens? You know, are they going to get towed? Will there be a fine? Kind of that.
This is an age-old, anybody who's owned commercial property, it's an age-old problem, and we deal with it. I mean, we've been able to be flexible with our neighbors in recent years because we haven't fully utilized our own, but we can deal with it because we need to keep our commercial tenants and our residents happy. You know, a resident tenant is not going to be happy if their car gets towed, so we'll have to manage it. But I think the other thing is with snow removal, with designated spaces, it does help us with snow removal when we do get, this year has been unusual, but normally we get a fair amount of snow and we have to deal with it. So I think the designation does help us in that area, but I do think.
Who picked 11, you or the bank?
I'm not sure how we got to that number. I think it might have been a mix between the employees and how much retail traffic they thought they needed.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
It may have been a combination of staffing and how many, the customer flow they felt they needed. It may have been based as much on the square footage of the.
But what I'm asking
Part.
you, did they say we want 11 spaces, or did you say we think 11 is an appropriate number?
11 was,
Who's the driver for the number?
I would guess the bank. It certainly makes sense to me, just because with a bank that size, they've got to have staff. So it does make sense to me. And dedicating spaces in front of the bank doors, hopefully the merchants will be coming in to make their deposits and stuff like that. They're not going to want to park willy-nilly. They're going to want to park in front of the bank.
I am just being conscious of time here. It feels like we've gotten testimony. I think we're going to give a couple talk about a couple other things in deliberation. Does the board feel like this is another item that we can give further direction on out of that? Okay.
I think,
Great.
if I could
Yes.
just ask, if there is some direction about reducing, it would be super helpful for me if there was a specific number to be reduced by or maximum provided recommendation instead of just less, just along the spirit of specifics for when we come back in next time so that we can provide you with something that's acceptable would be helpful.
I would like to see a smaller number, but I don't know that I speak for other people.
Yeah, I think further, more specific is what we would want to come to you in deliberation. I don't think anyone on the board has thought this through enough
Yes.
to try to give you.
But I will say that every member here has said this is too many
Yes,
parking
exactly.
spaces.
So I would say be expected that it will be less than our recommendation, but we would want to provide you more specific guidance. And maybe what would help deliberation is we see 2 handicap spaces that we expect would be reserved for the financial institution, correct? Those 2?
Yes. Yep.
And then it was also noted a couple 15-minute drop-off sites or parking spots. How many did you foresee being the 15-minute limit?
I don't have that specific.
If you could provide it, it would have informed, but if not, that's fine. So we can get back to you on that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask, just out of curiosity, I hate to drag this out, but Could you, instead of designating bank parking spaces, could you prohibit tenant park, or apartment parking? I'm sort of flipping the calculus a little bit, but if you had signs that just say no apartment parking,
No resident parking?
no resident,
During hours of operation.
something like that, instead of saying dedicating this to this institution, what we are saying is, my experience with these mixed-use projects like this type is that the challenge is forcing people to fully use the garage, to be honest. It's, in the middle of the day when you come home for lunch, you don't wanna go in there, you grab a site and you run into your unit, right? And that's the time of day when we'd really like to push them into the garage. But it's just a thought, I don't know if it helps.
I think that did come up of, if these could be available for the other commercial tenant, that would be helpful. And if that's something you think you're
Yeah, we can definitely bring that back to you.
amicable, okay. So we'll consider that in deliberation too, as far as that recommendation. But I will give the further guidance that I would lean that way too, that they be opened more generally but based on the hours of operation of the bank. But available for the other commercial tenant as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else? Okay. And comment 32, if I haven't lost track, or did I skip? Oh, no, I skipped 31 right here on the screen. So we're looking for long-term bike parking on Lot 1, or that sufficient long-term bike parking is on one of the other lots. Could you speak to the long-term bike parking that will be available?
We have a really nice indoor facility in the apartment. I'm told it's full though.
We would lose a parking space if we had to increase the size to accommodate 2 more.
I believe we've got it worked out with the bank to have 2 and the locker in their room for their staff. Good. So that will come back with their list of comments, their solar and their other.
Yeah,
Cards,
it has been something that we've been communicating with the bank
It's been discussed and
on.
communicated, and they weren't understanding what the ask was.
Understood. Okay, so that's in the works, it sounds like.
Yes, and we're comfortable with the requirement.
Excellent. Comment 32, staff determines no additional discussion. Comment 33 are comments from the city arborist, so those will need to be addressed.
Lucy, do you have anything to add? We're going through quickly. I just want to make sure that there's nothing in those comments that we need to ask a question about.
No, and I already addressed them in the written
In the response.
comments.
Okay, thanks. I'm just trying to look quickly as we move along.
Yeah, make sure we don't miss anything to give feedback on. Comment 34, it looks like we are just looking for confirmation that shade trees have a caliper of 2.5 inches, even though the nursery may specify differently. To have that in the
We
record.
agreed to that in the written comments as well.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And comment 35 is comments from the stormwater section, also will need to be addressed.
We can do that.
And comment 36 is a recommendation to reduce the illumination levels of the locations to a more reasonable level on an order of 8 to 10 foot candles. And so this is for the illumination on Lot 1 at the proposed ATM. Is this something that I expect might need to be discussed with the tenant, but is that something that might?
Right, we have discussed it with them. They are looking to keep it at as high as possible, just from a safety perspective. It does get into a little bit of whether or not we're going to be allowed to keep the ATM, so I'm not sure how important it is to sort out the exact amount of foot candles we'll be allowed to have here.
It seems
without-
like tiny details
Right,
on a
yeah.
larger project.
Right.
I will say that the board has in the past considered illumination levels under a canopy in a slightly different, pun not intended, light than overall site illumination levels. So there may
Okay.
be some available flexibility if we get to that point.
Okay.
But I think it's not a good use of time to discuss it now.
Yep.
Thanks.
Great. And comment 37, no additional discussion needed. And with that, we have a number of items that we're going to discuss in deliberation and give, as we've noted, share that back with you, which is not always the case. So we have those list of items that you'll have feedback from us before the next time we see you, but have some marching orders as well.
Yeah. Thank you for that, and thank you for, we got lucky in being able to get through all these comments, so thank you all for your time and doing that.
Thank you all.
We really appreciate it. We got lucky.
So we need
thank you.
to decide on a date to continue.
Should we take public comment?
That's a great idea.
Okay.
Thanks, Gwen.
Anyone, any public comments? Anyone online? Sounding like none, so now we can choose the next date.
So we would need revised materials 2 weeks before the continued hearing date. I can have the board deliberate on the things we were going to we discussed deliberating on April 18th, but they wouldn't, so then I would not be able to get the feedback to you until, the next day, which is 2 weeks before the next meeting. So I guess I would suggest continuing to May 16th, which gives the board time and then gives you 2 weeks to get me things 2 weeks before the next meeting. Is that okay, May 16th?
I'm not quite sure that it's enough time considering the coordination that we need to do with Chase Bank on the results. So what would happen if for some reason we agree tonight on May 16th, but we're not able to get you plans in time? We would just request a continuance to the following hearing? Okay.
Yeah, the sooner you can make that request, the better, because if the June 6th hearing were to fill up before you were able to get that request in, I wouldn't be able to grant that request, for instance. The other thing is if, you want to, I could see a situation where, say, all the site stuff is addressed in one meeting and then all the building stuff is addressed in another meeting. If you want to keep that date and address many things and then have a few outstanding things, that might be a good use of time too.
Okay.
So May 16th?
All right, I will move to continue SD 2305 to May 16th. Did I say that correctly?
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, I think we'll see you on May 16th.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Next up is minutes. Assuming John has a life and has not watched the February 22nd and March 7th meetings in order to review the minutes, I would propose just pushing the minutes out to the next meeting.
Yeah,
Okay.
sounds great. Other business? None?
Okay, so meeting concluded at 9:31. Thank you, everyone, for attending.